I'm Karen, and back with Kelly. We're going to be doing more questions. And so, the one that I wanted to ask you today, because this is something that I talk to people about a lot, and I think it's important to recognize that, early grief looks one way, grief a little further along looks another. And, people do talk about, like, does it get better? And when am I going to feel better? But when I always try to say to people is that, it changes, it's different from one place to the next. I know for sure, though, that early grief, especially in acute grief, has some very specific symptoms that go along with it. And I think describing them as symptoms is helpful because we can treat symptoms and we can try to manage symptoms as we try to progress, just as we would with the flu. Like, there's no medicine I can give you, there's nothing we can do, but we need to sort of wait out these symptoms as we're trying to heal in other ways. So, what are the most common grief symptoms that you come across as you're working with people?
I think the number one is memory issues.
Okay.
And people come into me and they're like, I think I have dementia.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, let's talk about that. Let's unpack that a little bit. And the reality is, our brain is trying to make sense of this loss and it can't. The Grieving Brain is a great book that really talks about that and talks about how our brain is trying to make sense of where our loved one is. And so it's working overtime almost. And we can't, so it causes memory issues. People can't remember things. They walk into a room and they're like, what am I doing here? Right. And I may do that all the time, but it seems to get increased when we're grieving. And then, the concentration issues, the difficulty focusing, those are all huge symptoms that I see. Obviously, sleep issues is another big one, appetite changes, the multitude of different emotions. We talk about really grief is a hot mess. That's kind of the best way, in my opinion, to describe it. You could be happy one moment and then the next year burst into tears over something and then back to laughing or whatever, that oscillation that we do, right? And so when I worked at hospice, we did a workshop called Am I Grieving or Going Crazy?
Oh,
Because it
good.
can make you feel like that, right?
Yeah, sure.
You're like, wait a minute, one minute I was okay, and then the next I'm a hot mess again. And so what's wrong with me? And it's because you're grieving. It just doesn't make sense. Our brains can't make sense of it. We have trouble accepting that reality that they're really gone. I mean, really, when you think about it, one minute they're here and then the next they're gone. It's
Yeah.
kind of really mind blowing to think about how precious life is and how quickly it can happen. And so these symptoms are really, normal. And I think it's really important to normalize these symptoms because people really think that there's something wrong. I mean, I'm sure this happens all the time in your groups. People will be like, I'm going to share something. It's probably going to sound a little weird, or you
Mhm.
probably have never experienced it. And then they share it, and everybody else in the room or the group is
Like,
like, oh, yeah, that happens to me all the time, or I've been that, right? And so I really think being able to normalize some of these symptoms that we experience, and it looks different for everybody. I've always said you can have like lists of all the normal symptoms, and they're all normal, but they just look different. And like you said, that early acute grief is going to look different than maybe 2 years down the road or 5 years down the road, especially
yeah,
that grief brain that we talk a lot about, right? Where that fogginess, that forgetfulness, the concentration, the focusing issues, that, some people will say to me, I feel like now that it's been 6 months, I'm starting to come out of that fog.
yeah,
I can start, remembering more or focusing better or, whatever it is.
yeah, yeah. I remember one time I was in a group talking about this, talking about focus and saying that, it's the concentration, the lack of focus. And someone said to me, they said, well, actually, I don't feel like lack of focus is my problem. I think my problem is I can only focus on my grief.
Mhm,
And I just,
mhm.
there's no room for anything else. So I thought that
That
was almost kind of like
rumination.
a flip on that a little bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, like, you're so hyper focused, and involuntarily, I think sometimes people would actually not mind thinking about other things, especially if they're at work or out with other people. But it's just so constant, takes up so much room, and it's so demanding. Um, And I think that kind of leads into what I think is one of the bigger ones along with that is exhaustion.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Yes.
yeah, and how it's such a mental exhaustion and how that can be more tiring, I think, often than a physical exhaustion. And a
Mhm.
lot of people say, but I'm not even doing anything.
Yep.
You could literally be spend all day on the couch looking at the window, don't not talk to a soul, and be wiped out, just
Mhm.
absolutely wiped out. And I think it is because there's just this overdrive, of thoughts that are happening, and it's just draining and it takes a lot out of you. And I think a lot of times too, when we're working through something, we're kind of looking for problem solving and solutions, and we're just in this constant loop that goes nowhere. And that too, feels exhausting. In addition to the fact that maybe a person's just flat out not sleeping, feeling very overwhelmed by all the things that they have to do if they've, lost maybe a spouse or a partner and they're taking on household duties. And, for other people that are
Agree.
managing estates. Yeah. I mean, it's just exhausting. I,
Yeah.
I, I think 100% of the people, 100% of the people I've worked with have said that that's a symptom for them.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody until you've gone through a significant loss realize how exhausting grief is.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not something that you can even try to comprehend, and it's just it is so and like you said, you could do nothing, you can sleep great, and you can still just feel mentally and physically exhausted because grief isn't just, it isn't just emotional, right? It is mental, it is cognitive, it is behavioral, it is spiritually, right? And we don't look at grief isn't just one thing, right? People
Right.
think, oh, it's just sadness. No, it's so much more. And there's just all of these layers of symptoms that we
Yeah.
experience. And it can really impact us in so many different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other symptoms or anything that you come across pretty regularly?
Jaw pain.
Okay.
Yep, everybody clenches their jaw or has TMJ.
Okay.
Um, that's a big one, but other physical symptoms, the stomach aches, the headaches, the back pain, that's another big one. And then, if we look at the thoughts, like what you're talking about, the rumination,
Mm,
focusing on maybe how they died,
yeah.
or, aspects of that, or what other people aren't doing for them, right? People get really focused on that. Unfortunately, our brain is like Velcro to the bad and Teflon to the good.
Yeah.
So our brain loves to focus on the bad. And I believe my goal with my clients is really to be able to help them focus on the life of their loved one rather than the death. And
Mm,
so being able to shift that perspective, but our brain loves to go to that ending. And we can really get stuck on that,
yeah.
with those ruminations and those intrusive thoughts, and maybe even flashbacks, especially if it was a traumatic loss. And
Yeah.
even if somebody didn't witness the loss, they still can create this mental image of what they think happened. We still have to process that and work through that.
Oh, for sure. Even the trauma of the phone ringing.
Mhm.
Some people find that
Exactly.
they are then, forever traumatized by the sound of their phone.
Mhm.
And,
Or the siren,
mhm.
or,
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. One that I think of is lack of interest.
Mhm.
I think that that is pretty common with people. And it's always funny because people are like, gosh, I'm not interested in cleaning my house or doing my laundry. I'm like, well, were you ever really that interested, in doing those things? So, we're kind of like down on ourselves. But yeah, there was usually more of a motivation to kind of keep things tidy. But what I always say to people is like, listen, you're probably not even interested in the things that do get you excited or
Yeah.
used to, like a hobby, a sport, spending time with friends, traveling. Like people just really, it for a lot of people feels like they just don't care. Like none of these things matter, and that definitely I think comes up a lot.
Yeah, definitely. There's just
Yeah,
so many, and it's really
I
unique
know.
for each person.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about this for probably hours
I
all the
know,
time.
I know, I know. Well, we'll have to save it for some future questions,
Yes,
but yeah, this is definitely a good start. I think we probably hit some of the more common ones for
yes,
sure.
I agree. I
So,
agree.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate your help in answering this today.
Yeah, thank you.